In my previous video, we covered the topic of crowding out. During this short video, I would like to cover the discussions that we have had during 2010s and 2020 now about crowding out. So let's go to my full desktop. So we finished our previous video clip in the debate about crowding out in the early 2010s. This debate actually includes also the word crowding in. So some researchers in the MIT they have found that actually when governments invest in technology, they are able to see how actually private investment increases as well. As you know, when technology is an investment, sometimes a very long term, so it's very difficult for private investors sometimes to assess the risks that investments in technology can carry. So in this sense, we will say actually crowding in, which is a new concept. Let's go here and see some of the most important aspects in crowding out empirically. So I have downloaded two papers here. This one is a response to institutions, foreign direct investment and domestic investment crowding out or crowding in. This is a paper, this is a response to a paper with this title here. In general, the summary of this response to a paper says that these authors raise to criticisms of other authors that a more appropriate instrumentation strategy eliminates the significance of the effect of governance, and the finding that foreign direct investment crowds out private investment is reversed using their preferred dependent variable. So this summary or this paper, what is going to say is, in general, that because of the lack of actual data for private investment, yes, so it's very difficult to arrive to an answer in terms of saying whether there is crowding out coming from foreign direct investment or not. And I think that is one of the big issues in the debate about crowding in and crowding out. Yes? So all research on the relationship between FDI, foreign direct investment, yes, or public investment if you want, and DPI in developing countries, it has a lot of poorly quality of data. And that is a very significant issue in order to arrive to the question on whether we have crowding in or crowding out when increasing government expenditure. So researchers are usually faced with data on a total investment, yes, gross fixed capital formation, and public investment from different sources. And we usually is constructed using different conceptual bases, and that is like a drawback in all the literature when trying to arrive to the question of crowding in or crowding out. Yes. So we have another paper as well, so you can have a look at this. Yes, this response about the paper, but I think one of the most interesting papers that I found for 26th of July 2020 is very recent, is about local crowding out in China. This is a good example in terms of crowding out. Juan and Pagano and Paniza found that during 2006 and 2013, local public debt crowd out the investment by private firms by tightening their funding constraints while leaving state-owned investment unaffected. As you can see, these authors, or if you read this article, you will see these authors analyze different regions of China with obviously different levels of public investment in those regions. They arrived to the conclusion that actually there is crowding out in China regionally, which is a very interesting a paper because of the problems in data that we discussed previously. Okay, guys, so I think that is the discussion that I wanted to cover about the crowding out discussion in the early 2010s and now 2020. Finally, we have another discussion. This is whether money supply is exogenous or endogenous. I explained before that exogenous is a variable that is outside of the model. If you want, allow me the metaphor, is like a variable that is like God. Yes, it's outside of the model, right? It's a variable that cannot be changed by any variable inside of this the data of inside of the model that you have. The question is whether money supply is exogenous outside of the model or endogenous. So in general, the monetarists or the extreme monetarists are going to argue that it's exogenous, meaning that the central bank is the only entity that is going to define what is the money supply. So as you have seen recently, central banks, sometimes they increase the money supply by, for instance, means of quantitative easing, although it's not the only way they have to do that, yes. And extreme Keynesians are going to say that contrary to this belief of the monetarists, money supply is actually endogenous. This means that money supply is going to depend as well on aggregate demand. Banks actually create credit, right? And if obviously if the curve of money supply is flat, there are not going to be actually problems in terms of carry on increasing the government expenditure. The Keynesian views then oppose the monetarist views. The Keynesian views are usually views are supported or are based in left-wing ideologies or political ideologies, and the extreme monetarist view are like theories that help the extreme right perspective of economics, right? Need to reduce endogenous element if the government adopts control of money supply as basis of monetary policy. In these moments, for instance, talking about this second point, we are in a moment in which governments and central banks are trying actually to restart the engine of the economy by increasing quantitative easing. This is money supply, and through a lot of government expenditure. Actually, it's a very difficult situation, because in this instance, the source of the funding of the government is actually the central bank. So the central bank is printing money, yes, and with that money is buying government bonds. The government then uses that government in order that money in order to start new investments, new projects, and to try to cap or to avert the crisis. However, we have seen as well during this debate in the recent years that it's very difficult to control money supply directly. So I actually predict that next year we are going to have a lot of problems in terms of inflation, or inflation expectations at least, because I think all countries at the same time have increased money supply in their economies. So let's see what is going to happen with the debt during the debt problem during next year. I think I promise you that is going to be a problem together with unemployment, which are debt, unemployment, and inflation are like problems that are very linked together. Finally, there is a question about the impact of the injection of liquidity. What is going to happen? Are we going to have inflation? We are in a deflationary crisis at the moment. The problem was actually very low demand because of the pandemic. And well, as well, we have problems with supply because many companies have to close, and obviously that affects the whole economy in both sides. But in general, we have seen deflation. So I believe that the biggest determinant of the deflation is obviously very low aggregate demand rather than supply. All right, guys, I think with this I finish this lecture on money supply and the effects of monetary policy on national income and other variables that we consider in economics. See you in my second lecture.